So
Right.
depending on the size of your list and how you want to display your form and whether you want to use that specific type of form, the managed metadata won't show up there.
And this is why consultants always have "it depends" as an answer, because it depends,
Yeah.
right? And often it depends. All right, everybody. Today is August 21st, 2024. The gang is all here, and today we're going to talk about using SharePoint Managed Metadata for search. So we're going to start with a recap because this is an extension of the last episode that we did on this sort of topic. We're going to start with a recap. Then we're going to talk about managed metadata versus a term store. So there is sort of a difference there. So we want to make sure that we've defined our terms. And then we're going to talk about where managed metadata and term stores fit into our IA, because that's probably one of the most important parts. Don't use it if it's not the right fit in your information architecture. Then we're going to talk about search experience benefits. I'm going to make a little bit of a plug for why managed metadata fields are a little bit harder when we're coding, and using the term store is a little bit harder when we're coding. Not insurmountable, obviously, but it's a little bit harder. So we just need to know that. And so let's kick ourselves off. Last time, when we last saw our heroes, Carrie, tell us what we talked about.
So just to give a little bit of a recap, just a couple of sort of high-level sentences on sort of what we covered last time and where we left off. So we talked about the term store and managed metadata, and how the term store is this centralized directory where you can establish and manage all of these commonly used terms across the organization. And, you know, there's different places you can create this. So there's the tenant level global term store, which makes those terms that you create accessible from all the sites in your intranet. Or there's the sort of site level locally managed term store, which is really just if things are specific or relevant only to a certain function or site or project, you may want to create those in that specific site. But in general, the preference to sort of create it at that higher level in case you want to reuse it in other places down the road. And I think Derek will talk a little bit about some of the benefits and how that's one of the benefits of doing that. How it's related to IA, I know Mark, you expanded on this a bit last time, just in how managed metadata is one of those components or those building blocks of information architecture, and that using it is a way to sort of bring in that consistent tagging of content across your intranet, and how that can be super important for finding content and search and things like that. As far as managing the term store and some of the security considerations, I think the key takeaways there were, you know, if you're creating terms in the global term store, those terms are managed from the admin center. And just having access to the admin center, I guess, doesn't quite cut it, because I think you need some explicit rights to either the whole taxonomy or those individual term groups or term sets within there in order to be able to manage or, you know, contribute to those different nodes that you have there. Whereas site level terms, in a local site, if you're a site owner, you can go into site settings and see those terms and edit those terms on that specific site. So it's a consideration to think about where you're creating these things, not only for how you're going to repurpose it, but whether or not you'll have access to edit those things. And then as far as the known issues in PowerShell, and I know Julie and Todd, you can talk more to it, but essentially these are definitely not my areas, but essentially naming those terms can be a bit slow. And you know, if you're renaming them, you want those to like sort of update in all those instances that you're using it. And I guess that can take some time, and there's some limitation in those capabilities. And, you know, in terms of PowerShell, we talked a little bit about how you can import and export those term sets using PowerShell as one of your methods to do that. So it's essentially
Awesome.
the recap in a nutshell. Yeah. And so this, not to keep belaboring the difference of these two definitions, but this slide just sort of clarifies the difference between the two. And essentially the term store is your physical place where you're adding the terms, creating them, building them, managing them, all the things. And managed metadata is really your method by which you're pulling those into SharePoint. So using managed metadata columns is your way to sort of reference those terms in the term store and serve them up as values in your libraries or your lists or your pages and content types and all the things you would typically use.
I think it's great that we recover it though, because I think as SharePoint professionals, we tend to use those two terms interchangeably as if they're the same thing, and they're really not the same thing. I definitely find myself doing it. I think managed metadata is the one I land on more often. I rarely refer to the term store unless I'm coding, but the point, I'll be like, oh, just use managed metadata, when sometimes I mean go into the term store and sometimes I mean a field. So I think it's really good to just level set so that everybody knows what the difference between the two is.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Oops,
and the last thing I was just going to say is that they just sort of like work together, right? One is like where you go to do it, and the other is like that mechanism by which you use it to organize and find files and really help with all that content management and search, which Mark is going to talk about now. So
yeah. All right, Mark, tell us about information architecture in the term store. This is the same slide we used before, but I think it's best to...
This is my favorite opening slide for information architecture stuff, because it's really all of the things that I think of as being parts of information architecture in SharePoint. They all fit together. They all interact with each other. Sometimes I make the ones that we're talking about darker blue, and I realize lists and libraries really should be darker blue on this one. So it's not always clear exactly, or it's not always exactly sort of boxed in, but we're going to cover managed metadata and search mainly in this discussion, just to give you a little bit of framing.
All right, cool. All right, so Derek, you're gonna sort of talk about why we might use it, right?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that as well as some of the benefits. So essentially, as Carrie was saying, managed metadata column is how we use the term set. The term set obviously being where all the values are stored. We use this for things like office locations, or that are maybe, and you can nest them. So maybe things that are grouped by region. So you've got the Northeast region, and then you've got the 6 offices in there. Also things like states. If everybody has a states list, keeping that information in the term store and creating a managed metadata column for it is one of those better use cases. One thing to remind folks about on this is that, and this isn't necessarily specific to managed metadata, but site columns in general, if you think that there is even a possibility that you're going to be using a site column more than once in in multiple site collections, you really want to create that at the enterprise level, at the tenant level, and that way it can be reused. And that's really the key component here is reuse. And so making it so that you can use it across multiple site collections and it'll be the same. That way, when you update it or you make any changes, that'll flow down to your individual sites that you're using it in. There are a couple of alternatives to using a managed metadata column. The first being choice fields. I'm kind of partial against choice fields, just simply because I sort of have an old school bias. And that back in the old days with choice fields, if you modified or changed things in the choice, things didn't update. I don't know if that's actually still the case. Mark, do you know that?
It is still the case, which is why I think they're evil. One of the reasons I think they're evil.
They are also evil because when you're trying to do a migration and there were historical values in a choice field, you then have to go in and add those and then take them out again. So you're just left with this really mishmash of stuff. Lookups, on the other hand, can be very good if everything you need and lives inside of the same site collection, right? But if you're trying to do this at the enterprise level, or you're trying to share column use, lookups are not that choice. Managed metadata really is the way for you to are the way for you to go. What's on the next slide, Julie?
Lookup columns were great in the monolithic site collections we would create in the old days, because you could inherit them all the way down the information architecture chain. But now that we're flat, they don't work. They don't.
Absolutely.
They're less useful.
Yeah, I was just going to add back when we were talking about, adding what kinds of data you would add to the term store. If you're adding that kind of content to the term store, there's almost always going to be, almost always going to be the right decision to then add the managed metadata column you create that attaches to that term set into the content type hub, because you wouldn't be creating it globally if it didn't have global impact on your IA, right? So it's almost always the right place to put it. The only time I'm going to just give 1+1 for choice fields is when it's super simple, like active or not active, when it's a very short list of words that are things like that. Choice fields are really handy for those types of fields, and do then, when we get to the coding part later, make that coding a lot easier, especially if you're creating custom forms and whatever. And we have some limitations we're going to talk about. So there are
something like red, yellow, green would be totally fine. Something like
exactly.
a list of departments gets messy.
Yeah, so choice fields have their place. I don't want to call them fully on evil. I do use them, especially in coding solutions. So
yeah, I have used them, especially I've been doing a lot of workflows recently, like Power Automate workflows, and using those for the status.
Yeah.
Because those don't or very rarely change. I wouldn't necessarily put all of those into managed metadata, especially because each site collection or each workflow may have a different set of status. So it's the kind of thing where you could put a status field with, 1, 2, 3 in the hub, and then you could, at the site collection level, you could actually override those levels.
Yep.
But
exactly.
Yes.
Don't forget that with the new, at least currently with the new SharePoint list forms, when you go to add your columns, managed metadata columns are currently not available as an option there. So depending on the size of your list and how you want to display your form and whether you want to use that specific type of form, the managed metadata won't show up there.
And this is why consultants always have "it depends" as an answer, because it depends, right? And often it depends. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Some benefits of managed metadata.
Yeah. So, the reasons, there are 101 reasons why we want to use managed metadata, why I specifically, try to urge my clients to use it. And the biggest one really is around data consistency. I've worked on a number of projects where we're looking at, state fields or office name fields, and things are spelled differently. If somebody fat fingers it, if it's a choice field, if it's a open text field, and that makes for, as you start to flow farther down the road and you start doing search or you start doing filters or any of that kind of thing, it makes it really, really hard for you to get real clean data. So managed metadata helps fix that problem. The other thing it does is provide a consistent and common vocabulary for certain things. So if you have a name, a set of departments, for instance, and you've got HR, right? Is it HR? Is it human resources? Is it human capital? Is it people and people and culture? These are all the kinds of things that, especially as names change, as departments and divisions change, you can set up things like synonyms to help create that common vocabulary. One of the things that we've done, we have one client that has a list of locations, and they've got like 150 locations. Sometimes people refer to the locations by their location ID, like 175. Sometimes they refer to them as the town that they're in. Sometimes they refer to them as the street that they're on. And so you can set up synonyms to help minimize that cognitive load and help meet your users where they're at so that they can type in the synonym for what it is that they're trying to get to. And they still get to the end result while keeping your data consistent.
Certainly makes things a lot easier.
Yeah. The other thing is, as we were all sort of talking about, creating terms at the enterprise level, it provides reuse for the same set of data. So if you have a list of states and you have a site column, a managed metadata site column for states, you can then use that all over your intranet, as well as making searching and filtering a heck of a lot easier. Because your data is now consistent.
Cool. All right. So let us move on to site columns. Mark, you want to sort of talk about this part, which we've been learning a lot about. Well, we had learned a lot about, but.
So this slide is one that I use when I talk about information architecture. It's generally true about site columns, but so I'm not going to go through all of this. But when we have a managed metadata column and we want to use it in search experiences as a filter, we need to make sure that site column gets crawled, it gets indexed. So we have to create some items or documents with content in those columns. Those then become crawled properties, and you see in green, I show that this applies to managed metadata column will turn into two different crawled properties. When you live in an English only world, which I have the luxury of doing, you can use that OWS underscore applies to, and it'll work fine, or your primary language if there's only one language in your tenant. If you want to be able to use translations, you'll want to use OWS underscore tax ID underscore the name of the column as your crawled property to map to a managed property. And in this case, I'm mapping to refinable string 04. And you'll see how that plays out on the next slides.
All right, let's move forward then.
So we're doing this in the search schema. This is just a little bit more about how that works. You go into the properties for, in this case, refinable string 04. You go to the map properties and you select either OWS underscore applies to or OWS tax ID applies to. I have been using the one without tax ID for years, and I just hadn't ever thought about it, and I realize it's a bad thing. I should be using the tax ID one because then we're set up for translations if we need it. So once you've done that, you can see down on the bottom when you look at refinable string 04 in the search schema, you can see which crawled property it has mapped to it. That used to respect the upper lowercase, but for some reason Microsoft decided everything's going to be uppercase from now on. So that doesn't mean anything. It just looks a little bit different.
Yeah, as Kayla mentioned in the chat, it sort of suggests that you should just always use that tax ID one because it doesn't hurt anything, certainly.
Yes.
But you can get away with it if you are only, a smaller organization that's not multinational and you only have one language spoken in your organization.
Right.
So.
Yes, Caleb, that has become my conclusion, that I should always use the more complicated one.
And I think, just to reiterate, managed metadata supports multiple languages.
Yeah.
Right.
So whereas earlier when we were talking about choice fields only handle the values that are in the choice field, whether it's English or Spanish or French. It's all it's all one set of text values. So if you need multilingual, then managed metadata is the choice that you need to make.
It depends, Derek. It depends.
It depends.
Wow,
always.
That's so strange. So then once the search indexing has caught up, you can start using those managed metadata column values in your PNP search results. So what this looks like, and these are little snippets from the configuration panels in the PNP search results web part, is on first step on the left is you customize the slots. Now we're using SharePoint search here because this is where we can do all of this cool stuff. In the slots, we put that auto prefix, and it sort of, I think about it as it changes the way the web part thinks about the data. It makes it smarter about what's in that slot. And you can either do that just on tags, or if you're going to create a separate slot like I'm doing here with applies to, I can also put auto in front of that, and it makes the web part smarter again about how it thinks about that data. And then finally, you enable localizations. All of these are on the same, you get to them all from that first configuration panel in the PNP search results web part. It's a little bit, and these are things you don't have to do with any other column type if you're using them as filters. They're special to managed metadata columns.
Right. And so if you're getting the vibe, managed metadata fields and taxonomy stuff is a little bit trickier. And this is why when we code it, it's also trickier because it has, but again, that's because it has more rich features, right? The multilingual piece of this is what makes it more complicated and makes it harder to configure under the covers so that it all just works. So when you want to add it as a filter, then.
So, yep, in the filters web part, you can give it a display name. It doesn't have to be applies to, but that's what my original column was named. And then you tell it which refinable string you want to use. And then how do you want to represent that in the filters? And here I'm using a checkbox and I'm expanding it by default. And over on the right, I'm probably checking also show how many values there are for that particular, how many occurrences there are for that particular value.
In the chat, Dan is asking if we have any examples of using that auto prefix.
Yes. So if you go to the next slide,
I will. Here I am.
You see where so this is a slide that shows how the four PNP Modern Search web parts can fit together. But the one with a number 2 on it is the PNP Search Results web part. And you notice that I'm just using the standard, well, I'm using the list layout, and I've made one little tweak to it that Casper gave me. So there's Casper's name. So the tags that you see at the bottom there, you can see there's a little tag for managed metadata, and you can see different values listed there. If you don't do the auto thing, those will look like garbage to most human beings. They'll have the text in them, but they'll also have several GUIDs, and so it will be very ugly. If you do the auto and then turn on localization thing, you get this you get exactly what you want, the label instead of the GUIDs included with the label. The formatting enhancement that Casper's put into the next release is what's making them look even nicer than they do in the current release, which is they sort of run together and you can't tell where one begins and one ends. So that's sort of the quick, we've got a managed metadata column. We're going all the way through to using it in a search-driven UI to help enhance the way people access the data. And you can see the filter on the left side for applies to is there with the values as well. Now, the nice thing about this is this works whether applies to is a single select or a multi-select column. It does that work for you. The web parts here will do that work for you.
Yeah, it's super helpful. It is other notes. I mean, I think there's almost no time you don't want to use the auto, but if you for some reason need the GUID, there are handlebars helpers that are part of PNP Search. So if you're writing your own template, you can split them out and manage it that way. So there's ways to get around it, but if you've just got all you have to do is put that auto letter on the front of it, it's so much easier and it just does it all for you and you don't have to think about it. So it's a lot better. Derek, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about the if you look over on the left on the filters, you can also you can do search by those values. So using that, you can do a string, you can start to type in the string that you're looking for. So if you're looking for Massachusetts and it's too far down on the list, or it's a very long list, you can start to refine that very quickly. So for your users, it really streamlines that user interface. Yeah. That's not necessarily MMS. That's how PNP Modern Search works. But generally when we use MMS or Managed Metadata Service, we're using it on longer lists of data. Mm-hmm. And so having the ability to quickly get to that piece of data is really important.
Yep, I totally agree. All right, so I've been yapping about extensibility being harder. So just in general, updating managed metadata, so MMS being a shorthand for managed metadata columns, is more complicated. So there's essentially this hidden taxonomy field in every time you go and add a managed metadata field to your list, there's a second field that's like this hidden taxonomy field that you is where the values get set and stored. And it's sort of like if you had multiple MMS fields in your list, then all the values of all the MMS fields go into that one list in sort of like a big blob of information. And so it's a little bit more complicated to like pull things out. When it's a single, like not a multi-select, but a single select MMS field, it's pretty straightforward. It's not as hard. It's an update, but the string you have to update it with has to have that GUID. It has to have the value, and it has to have what's called a WSSID, which is you just set to -1. When it's a multi-select field, then you have to deal with that hidden taxonomy field, and you have to know what it is, know what the internal name is. It's usually the name of the field _0 is the internal name, but it's not always. So you kind of have to look it up, find out what that field is, and then you have to make this object that you have to update the field with. And it's a lot more complicated. If you use PMP.js, it's all in the documentation. So that's there for you. And then of course, creating a list of terms. So now we're talking not the MMS column, but the term store. You have to have rights to the term store. We talked about that when we talked about security, that the security is very specific to the term store. So you have to have specific rights to the term store. And then unfortunately, the REST endpoints for SharePoint for getting to the term store, they're still available, but they've been deprecated. And if you're using the ones for through the graph, which is how you can get to them now, they're not as robust as the ones we had for SharePoint. And so walking the tree of terms when you have nested terms in a term set is a little bit more difficult. We've created some helper functions or methods, in PMP.js to help make that a little bit easier, but it's still just a lot more work. And so just wanted to everybody to be aware of that. All right, it is 12:57. We have some resources for you. So there's the link to last 2 weeks ago's episode of Ask and Praxis. Mark has linked what is a site column from Microsoft Learn, and then how do columns become managed properties is also a Microsoft Learn article. And of course, if you are going to use PMP search, we have modern search, we have information about that in a bunch of other episodes of Ask and Praxis.
We should have that as a link to
Yes.
on the resources. So I put it in chat.
We should. Oh, well, perfect. Exactly what we need. Okay. So next time, September 4th, Todd wanted to talk about backup and archive. We figured let's give him something to talk about since we made him be silent.
Yay.
No, I'm muting you. You're muting you. You're not talking. Next time, Todd gets to talk Microsoft 365 backup and archive. We'll give him a chance. It's going to be the Todd show. Or mostly the Todd show. We all have opinions on all these things. Okay. Collab Days, New England. People, registration is open. If you live in the New England area or you feel like traveling to beautiful New England, please sign up. The registration is open. We have the full agenda. All the speakers have been accepted, although all the speakers have not confirmed that they're speaking, but almost all have. So we have an agenda up and all of those things. So, check it out. Join us for that day. We're doing it on Friday instead of a Saturday this year, trying to make it a little more accessible for people. So definitely come and join us for that. And if you or your organization would like to sponsor, we're always open to hearing about that. You can reach out to any Sympraxian to get funneled through to Derek for more information on that. And then in December, ESPC is happening, and Mark, Derek, and Patrick will be there. So if you're interested in going to the large European SharePoint conference, it's in Stockholm this year. It moves almost every year. So definitely join them there. And so that's all we have for today's episode. Thanks everybody for joining as always, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask and Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.